Hi, everyone. I'm Katie Couric, and I'm very excited to be able to have a conversation about a new film called Minari with its director, Lee Isaac Chung, as well as Stephen Yeun, who stars in this movie. And gentlemen, it's great to see you both. Thank you for doing this. I'm really excited to talk about this movie.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank
This is
you.
really great.
So,
Yeah,
Isaac,
it's an honor.
you
Thank
know,
you.
You're welcome. Isaac, tell us about the genesis of this film. I mean, it's so many things. First of all, it's extraordinarily beautiful.
Thank
And I
you.
was completely mesmerized. I was telling you guys before we officially started that I just finished watching it about an hour ago. And I know it's not autobiographical, but it's not autobiographical, but it is, I think, influenced by your upbringing. And it's quite a departure from your previous films. So, can you tell us the inspiration behind this movie and why you wanted to make it?
Sure. It's a story about family, and I would say that it's really because of my own family, my wife and daughter, and our life together, that got me started thinking a lot more about revisiting some of my own memories and things that I've lived through as a child. So it's not entirely autobiographical, but it does start with basically an exercise I did in which I wrote down a bunch of memories. Like I just sat down and decided to write out a lot of things that I remember from the time I was my daughter's age. And as I was doing that, I just started to see like a story really come out. One that could tell a story for a father and for a mother and for a grandmother and for children, and somehow that their individual stories could weave together to a family drama, and that's really the way it started.
Can you tell everyone watching a little bit about your background because you grew up in Arkansas, right?
I did, yeah.
Which is
Um,
must have been a bit of a culture shock, Isaac. Can you tell us just briefly your family's story, your immigration story?
sure. I mean, I'll tell you, for me, there was never a shock because I was born in Colorado, and then by the time I was like 2 months old, I was living in the South. We moved to Atlanta, Georgia. Um, Let me just move this to.
It's great glare. I like the glare. You
Yeah,
look great.
I don't know if I can fix that.
Very directorial, right?
Yeah,
All
yeah, yeah.
about
It's
the
great lens
lighting.
flare.
Yeah, that's right. I've got a guy out there holding a light. Um, but by the time I was 2 years old, we moved to Arkansas, and around age of 5, my dad decided we're going to move even further into the countryside of Arkansas, and he moved us into the Ozark Mountains onto this plot of land that hadn't been farmed. I still remember the weeds were up to my neck, and he just pulled up to this plot of land and told all of us this is where we're going to live now. And he hadn't told my mom. He had just gone ahead and bought the land without telling her. So that part of the film really comes out of true life. And then for me, the culture shock really came when I left Arkansas and I went to college on the East Coast.
What about for your mom and dad though? Did they come from tell us their story because it might be not your generation, but the previous one.
Sure, sure. So my mom and dad are both from around Seoul, Korea, South Korea, and my dad came before my mom did in 1976. So he came first without my mom, and he had to find a way to make a living to try to raise enough money for my mom and sister to come. And he fell into a job called chicken sexing, and that's something you see in the movie. And the interesting thing with that job is that it originated from Japan, and then a lot of Korean immigrants started to do it. And my dad fell into that. And when a Korean immigrant falls into that, it ends up taking you all over the country. You end up going to places where there aren't many Korean immigrants, but there are a lot of chickens. And so
Right.
that's basically why we ended up in the South and in Arkansas.
I feel terribly sheltered, Isaac, because I had never heard of chicken sexing before
Mm,
this film. And I thought, wow, that is a pretty tedious job. And, basically you check the sex of the chicken, and for
yeah.
the male chickens, they're incinerated, I guess, right?
Um, Yeah, if you want to get into the real details of it, it depends on the breed of chicken. Sometimes they will save the males if they're not. I mean, if they can be used, but for a
Uh-huh.
lot of breeds, they will get rid of the males. And I remember learning that quite young in life, and that being a strange thing. And my parents often sneaking home a few male chickens for us, so that we could, my sister and I could like play with them and raise them and things like that. And we'd always feel like we rescued these chickens from disaster.
Well, it sounds a lot more autobiographical than you're suggesting. At least the foundation of this film. Perhaps
Yeah.
the character evolutions may not be modeled after your parents, but certainly the setting and much about their life in Arkansas was very much like yours.
Yeah, I mean, really it starts with a lot of autobiographical details and memories, but it was important to try to make sure that it stands on its own and that it's its own film. I didn't want to create just a strict memoir. And that was one of the reasons, even with Stephen, as we did prep, that I made sure to encourage him not to imitate my dad or imitate any stories he's heard of my own life, but to make a new person, with his own work as an actor, to create someone. So
And
that's something that we endeavored.
Stephen, you did an awesome job portraying
Oh, thank you.
Jacob, right? And I'm just curious, before we talk about the character, what drew you to this film? And when you talked to Isaac about it, or when you read the script, how and why did it resonate with you?
I think what I loved about this script when I wrote it was, not only was it not only did it feel honest and true to an experience that I could relate to, but also it was unafraid to speak from its own point of view. It didn't, embedded in the script, there wasn't this necessary need to um, explain itself to anybody, or to assume that it was something that nobody else could grasp, but rather it doubled down on its own humanity in the script, that these people can live their own, that their lives are, worthy of being told. And I felt that when he wrote it. Yeah, it in some ways had faith and a respect for the people, and then also the people that would view this, that they could also access it on a place that didn't need explanation. And so for that, it felt like something true. And that's always something, for me as an actor, that I'm always drawn to. If it feels true on the page, that's something to do.
What about sort of the whole immigrant experience? I know that Isaac doesn't want this to be an immigrant's story necessarily, or just that alone, but
Mm,
I mean, it is very much imbued with
mm,
the kinds of hardships and the courage of people to come to this country and start with nothing and build a life. I mean, I'm always astounded when I witness these stories, and I'm just curious, how that kind of struck you as someone, I mean, you can tell
yeah.
us your story, actually, your family story.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my life story is a little similar to Isaac's and a little different in that I actually immigrated as well, when I was about 4 or 5 years old. So I remember when I came here. And so while I didn't have a conscious awareness of a complete conscious awareness of what was happening, or agency to what was happening, I definitely I was aware that things were different for sure. Um, but I think, I think there's a connection to something to do with isolation in some way. I think something about making your own way in this life is something that perhaps everyone can relate to. And maybe more specifically, the thing that really resonated with me was telling it from the understanding of the immigrant experience, is also in some ways telling it from the experience of a specific class, you know, um, to kind of start from nothing and make something. is such a it's such an incredible life. To start from one place and walk 100 miles and get to another place is incredible. And I think that feels woven into the fabric of, in some ways, this nation to some regard. I think a lot of people, I heard this one interviewer one time I was talking to saying that all immigrants are artists, and it is to make something from nothing. There's something there that I think really deeply resonated for me. Just the agency, and the ability to make your own life and your own way through this life. I hope people can connect to that.
Isaac, I found it really interesting about when this movie takes place, which is in the 80s. And
Mm-hmm.
I was very tuned in to kind of gender roles in
Mm-hmm.
the family and male pride and kind of the dynamics of a nuclear family, and in a way how much they have changed in the last 40 years or so. And I'm curious if that was something that you thought about as you wrote the script.
I certainly thought about it a lot. There were things going on in the 80s that I felt somehow were echoing again in the present day. We moved to Arkansas at a time of the farm crisis was happening in America. And all around, you'd hear of farms collapsing and farmers really struggling with their way of life. And I was also reading a lot recently that I think times have been really tough for farmers, and so that was bringing up a lot of memories for me. And at the same time, I think there's a lot of reckoning or rethinking what it means to be a man and what masculinity means. And that's something that, I didn't want to just think about prescriptively and try to tell people, well, this is the way it needs to be. But it was something that I was grappling with in my own life, in my own internal pressures, the things that I feel as a husband and a father, the messages I've heard as a son growing up, and also the things that I hope for my daughter as she grows up. And so I was wrestling with all those things, and I don't know, I just really tried to work through them in a very intuitive way and emotional way through the film. So there's a lot of discussion on gender in the movie, if you notice, with the chicks and different elements like that it's just basically it's me working things out.
Yeah, I thought that was really fascinating, and how much power Jacob had in the family dynamic, and how brave it was for his wife to, well, I don't want to give too much away, but she has to make some decisions, which I think right now don't seem that radical, right? But back then, I think through the lens of 40 years ago or so, that was a radical decision she was contemplating. So
Yeah.
I found that really interesting. And after I watched the film, it made me think I don't ever want to buy produce from a big industrial farm again, because you're right. I mean, farmers are hurting so badly, and it's such back-breaking work. And you saw that when he started his farm. And I'm curious about the role faith played in this movie as well. Because that is obviously a big theme with the man from Arkansas who befriends the family, who's quite evangelical, I think, to put it mildly, if not just even further.
Quite
further
Pentecostal
than
in
that.
a way. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us sort of about the role of faith and the role of, there seemed to be an interesting dynamic between the Korean church and then, of course, the church that they attended in their hometown.
Sure. Well, the Christian church is quite a big deal for a lot of Korean immigrants, because you come over, you don't have a real community outside of the church. The church is where you find each other, and you can have relationships. You can speak Korean. Your kids learn Korean. So it ends up being a very big deal. And also, personally, I found in the South, it's also very much deeply embedded in the culture and in who we are as people. My parents dropped me off at the First Baptist Church of Lincoln every Sunday before they went to work, so that we would learn how to speak English. So, for me, I kind of grew up in a church and grew up in that setting. But I also felt like the way faith works itself out in that community, and even in my own life, is maybe more complex than the way it's portrayed often in the media and in movies. So that was just something I wanted to kind of work through and write about. And I love writers like Flannery O'Connor and these writers who will treat faith very seriously and irreverently at the same time, and let it show how human people are, the people who do believe in things. And that's kind of what I was hoping to do with this film.
There's an element, I think, of mysticism too in your portrayal of faith and belief. And, it is very, I think, respectful, but also slightly, I wouldn't say comical, but fanciful, maybe, I guess might be the right word for it. Are you a religious person?
I mean, I think I do end up being quite mystical in a lot of my thinking and treat it very seriously. But at the same time, like I find some of my impulses to be a little funny, and to, I like to poke fun at myself for that too. So that's kind of all in there, but it obviously matters a lot to me, to the point that I wanted to let every character wrestle with faith in some way in this film. And from Jacob, who doesn't believe and feels like he's skeptical of everything, all the way to Paul, who is, on the complete opposite end, and yet they find a friendship together. I thought that sort of thing is pretty interesting, to show faith and friendship and counterintuitive things happening.
Yeah, I like that too. And Stephen, I loved all the actors in this film. They were really incredible. Can you tell me about working with some of the just wonderful people, including the kids, who were just so natural and cute and talented? What was that like? And what can you share with us about that experience?
I think it's a testament to what Isaac wrote. I think it's a testament to his casting, his directing. He really assembled a really wonderful group of actors that not only were massively skillful in their crafts, but also people that I feel like in some ways were called to something like this. We're just kind of drawn to something like this. Like I said, he wrote something so true and honest, in my opinion, that it really brought together the right people to service the words. And when we all came together, it felt, we only had a couple. I think we shot this in like 25 days or something like
Wow.
that. Yeah, we didn't have much prep. We didn't have time to like simulate family. We just dove in all together collectively, and down from from the kids, Alan and Noel, who the beauty of them is not just how wonderful and skillful they are, but just how pure. Alan is so pure. Noel was so pure. They kept us honest, because we all kind of had to be in and engaged and like living it out, so that they could also be engaged, and then they would reciprocate back, like whenever it might felt false. And they were really wonderful that way. And then Yeri, who so powerful, so strong, and so truthful. Yoon Jung, same, in her own powerful way. Just really, I think everybody held their own place within the confines of this family. They held their own space, and the film allowed people to kind of be as full as they could be in the situation. And then Will also to come in from the outside of this family, but have the graciousness to approach it in the way that he did. I think, this film really had an incredible cast and ensemble. I was really lucky to work with all these people for sure.
Yeah, and I know Yeti and Isaac. How do you pronounce the person who played the grandmother? They're I understand,
Yeun
celebrated actresses in Korea. I mean, they're very, very famous in Korea, correct?
That's right. I mean, they're famous for good reason. They're just incredible actresses, and we were so fortunate to have them on board.
What about the kids, Isaac? How was directing those kids, and had you directed actors that young before?
No, that was my first time with actors that young. I've worked with non-professional actors, whatever that means, I guess. But for Alan and Noelle to come in at the ages that they were 7 and 10 years old, and to be able to stand the rigors of the set. We were shooting so intensely because we had very few shooting days. They came with their lines memorized. They were always ready to work, and their parents were incredible supporters and working behind them and helping them. I really consider it a miracle that we pulled it off, and it's a real credit to those kids. They just did great, and I'm still impressed by them, obviously. And the same goes with Yeti and YJ and Steven. They just brought out the best in these kids. The way that they would help these kids along, I was so touched when I would watch them work. Particularly Steven was very good in understanding maybe the place that they were in as fellow Korean Americans as well, and trying to navigate their roles and trying to figure out their place in the family and all these things. I really loved watching Steven with Alan, particularly seeing them work things out together. And it was magical. It just felt like that feeling of family on set was bleeding into the performances, and vice versa. Those performances was bleeding into the set, and we were all able to have that culture of a family.
Not only did you shoot, I mean, thank goodness it only took, 25 days of shooting, 26 days of shooting, because you shot it in the summer in Tulsa, which must have been pretty miserable. I'm curious why you didn't shoot it in Arkansas, and just sort of what your experience was like shooting it where you directed the film.
I was angling for Arkansas, in Northwest Arkansas is where I grew up, but I grew up about 5 minutes away from Oklahoma, right on the border. So Tulsa was always the big city for us. Anytime we needed to go to an airport, it would be Tulsa. But in Arkansas, we couldn't get the right crew infrastructure up in that Northwest region, up in the Ozarks. Whereas in Tulsa, they had something more ready for us. And we had to shoot very quickly. So we just knew that, it's close enough to Arkansas. It's still in the foothills of the Ozarks, and we can pull it off. And so we did it. It was hot. There were lots of ticks and rattlesnakes. We had a guy on set one of his roles was to make sure that there were no rattlesnakes anywhere we were about to film.
I saw that in the credits, the snake wrangler.
Yeah.
Rewrite.
His name was Rewrite, so he had the greatest name.
Yeah.
But it was I think it was necessary that we film in a place that is going to be hot and emulate what's in the film. Like even our DP decided we're going to make it look hot because it is hot. Like he didn't want to hide it. And I feel like it comes through in a lot of the scenes in a way that pleases me. Like I'm satisfied with that feeling.
Steven, I know it was your idea to have Jacob wear a red baseball cap. And I'm curious why you wanted that to happen in the film, and what inspired you. And I imagine I might know some of the answers to this question, but go ahead.
Well, it wasn't necessarily that thought out, but I definitely was aware of what it was as it was as I had it. I actually found that hat at this woman's store. Her name is Jenny Salkas. She has a kind of a vintage shop here in Los Angeles, and I stopped by a couple of weeks before we started to try to find bits and pieces of what might be something that Jacob could wear, and I I asked for some hats, and she was so incredible. She laid out so much stuff. We actually ended up getting so much of our clothes from her, which was really incredible. But she had these hats, and I was looking for this specific type of hat. There's just this feeling and image of Korean American men from my dad's generation, where their heads are a little bit too big, so they can't get the hat all the way down, so they just kind of sit it on top, and so it's just this high trucker looking hat, and I was asking for that one. And I also inherited my dad's huge head, so I would try to put on all these different hats and nothing would fit, and finally the red one was the only one that would fit, and so I put it on, and it was perfect fit. And I thought about it, and I was like, oh, this is a red hat. And this was right in the smack dab in the middle of when red hats couldn't just be red hats anymore. And I kind of felt like, screw it. Like, why am I even being, one, it's a period thing. It's from another time. And two, it's a red hat. It's just a red hat. And so I wore it and I took it, and I think maybe the profound thing that happened as we were deciding when to wear it and when not to wear it is, and I don't want to signal this or put this out as if it was intentional. It was more just kind of a byproduct of what made sense. But it mirrored times when he would have that hat. Jacob would have that hat at times when I think he thought he was in control of a situation, when he could own something and when he could grab it and make it his. And in the moments where he might have been humbled or starting to understand that what he's after and what he's trying to make is a group effort, is being held up by so many more people than he thinks. That his wife is this backbone to this family that he can't even see clearly. His kids are upholding their existence. The grandmother is upholding their existence. Just the journey that he goes through of seeing everyone more clear because he doesn't need to own it or wrestle it or control it. He ended up not wearing the hat, and I wish I could say that was like a calculated, conscious choice, but it just kind of happened after as we were shooting it. Like some days I was like, yeah, I don't think I wear the hat today, but
I think we're never going to look at red hats quite the same way. And I think that certainly for me, watching this movie on the heels of the last 4 years and some of the policies of this past administration, I think it affected me even more profoundly. And Isaac, I'm curious if that was something that you were thinking about this common, beautiful immigrant experience that adds so much, life and texture and vitality to our country. And if you were cognizant of when this was coming out, how it might play differently given what we've seen happen.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I do feel heartbroken seeing kind of where the country is, and I feel like for a few years now, I've noticed that things like immigrants, farmers, Christians, red hats, all these sorts of things have taken on a different meaning. Maybe the meaning has gotten away from the reality in a way. The South is another one, Middle America. I just feel like what we were hoping to do with this movie, I don't know, how much we succeeded with it, but we wanted it to take back those things back to humanity, just to people, just to connect on that level. We were human beings. And also the red hat is just a red hat. You know what I mean? And I feel like we've just got to go back to a certain starting point where we can connect and see each other and have those hard discussions. For sure, we need to have hard discussions, but we also need to start with that basis that there's so much that connects us. You know, the fact that all of our grandmothers, you know, have done things in our lives similar to the grandmother in this film, have loved us or have, you know, driven us crazy, you know, all these different things. We have many shared experiences, in a way, shared humanity. And that's something that I hope comes out in this film.
In fact, Stephen, I thought it was beautiful just to watch this family try to stay together. And I was saying to Isaac that, you know, inside every family is a complicated, beautiful, intricate, confusing story of generations, but of just kind of finding our way. And it just made me think that you can see people walking on the street and you just have no idea what story is behind, you know, this one person and their lives and how they were shaped and the people who they interacted with. And I think when all is said and done, it really is very much about people and family and everyone just trying to find their way.
Yeah, I think that's why Isaac, wisely enough, is wary of the definitions by which we might try to capture this film right now. I think we're grasping at a feeling, if anything. We're grasping at kind of the nebulous, gushy, mushy stuff in between all of us. You know, the distance between all of us. And you know, we spoke with Ethan Hawke the other day, and he said this really wonderful thing about the how it's to love the distance between each of us, to honor the space that exists between each of us, that we don't own anybody else's existence. And I think, you know, with the story of this family, oftentimes I think the family in this movie miscommunicate love because they're all busy mired in duty, and they're busy thinking of their life and their worth being a measure of what they can offer, as opposed to just their humanity and the ability to love each other in spite of anything in regards to all of it. And so, yeah, and sometimes it takes a tragic, massive, crazy thing to happen for people to see each other a little bit clearer. But, you know, the ride with this film has been really profound and strange and beautiful because, you know, we made it the summer before 2020. And to have premiered it at the beginning of the year of 2020, and then to have life reflect thematically, at least, something so intertwined with, I feel like, the feeling of the film was crazy, and it continues to be so. So yeah, it's weird.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, there's a lot to kind of process and think about as you not only think about the year we've had, but also this film. And Minari is such an interesting name. Of course, I learned what it was in the course of watching the movie, Isaac. But why is that sort of the name of the film, and what significance does that specific I guess herb or plant have in this movie?
The whole idea for this film, when I did those 80 memories, the last one was, I remembered going to the Minari patch with my grandma. My grandma really did plant a Minari patch. And I remember that my parents at one point later in our lives remarked that, you know, of all the things that we grew, it was so difficult. This farm was so hard, but it was that Minari patch that really, it grew without effort, is something that they said. And I felt like there was something there about something that grows without effort, you know, the very thing that we all need in some way, and the very thing that speaks to us, that it's really there. And my grandmother had tapped into something and had this wisdom about her. That's why I wanted that to be the title, and to play off of what is this plant? It's a plant that really thrives in invisible places. Really, you plant it in thickets and in streams that are hidden away, and it ends up like purifying the water and does all sorts of things. It's very medicinal.
Mm-hmm.
So there was. I just felt it had so many poetic resonances with the film that I felt like this is it. This is what the title should be. Even though a lot of people don't know what Minari is, I figured they need to learn. So
And now I know I said it incorrectly. Minari.
oh, it's Minari.
Minari.
Yeah, but you know what? We often just internally say Minari as well, like everyone else. So it's totally fine.
Minari.
Yeah.
Well, it's an absolutely beautiful film, and I'm sure I'm going to be thinking about it for days to come. And I just realized, you know, here I kind of politicize things, and sometimes you don't have to politicize things. Sometimes they can just be beautiful, intimate stories about individuals, and they don't have to necessarily be juxtaposed, you know, against a backdrop of what's happening in the world. Sometimes it's just refreshing and kind of a cleansing breath to enter a world and just go with it without, you know, clouding it with all sorts of other things.
But that ends up being a political act in some way, to see the humanity. So I feel like maybe it's not all too different in some way, but I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Well, Isaac and Stephen, it's really fun talking to you, especially right, you know, it's like a wonderful debrief of what I just watched, and I can't recommend it enough to people. I really loved the movie. It was really beautifully done, and good luck with everything.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this.
Yeah, thank you for this.